I think it is really that gap that exists between strategy and activation. On the technology side of WG, nearly every leadership team that I've worked with has gone through some sort of messaging or positioning or branding exercise, and there's a lot of energy behind those consulting engagements. They're a lot of fun to go through to talk about big picture things like value propositions and differentiation and story. But what usually happens, or what's happened to the ones that I've talked to, is they get to the end of an engagement like that and they get all this material, all these strategic frameworks that they know they should be using.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Welcome back to the RevOps Champions podcast. Today's guest is Rob Wormley, founder and principal of WG, previously Pistachio, where he helps leadership teams turn positioning into revenue momentum. Rob leads messaging sprints to sharpen positioning and deliver go-to-market strategies that resonate with customers and drive results. In 2025, also created Groundcrew to specifically focus on helping home services franchises drive revenue in their local markets. Rob, welcome to the RevOps Champions podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Rob, what led you to focus on turning positioning into an operational lever?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've worked for the past 15 years for a lot of different startups on the technology side of things, small growing businesses. They're all trying to get to that next phase of growth. And the common thread between all of these companies that I worked with is they're all in incredibly saturated competitive markets, right? They all have problems with communicating differentiation, communicating value, and telling the story that helps their customer understand what makes them different and worth connecting with or buying from. And what I found was that positioning really is not limited to marketing. It's not a marketing problem. It's really an operational, organizational imperative where messaging infiltrates all departments across revenue, marketing, customer success, investor relations, internal change management. And so I saw a lot of founders and leadership teams that I work with struggle to operationalize it because nobody was owning it consistently for the organization. Sometimes it was a marketing problem, sometimes it was a product problem, sometimes it was a PR problem, and they really needed somebody that could tie the threads together and connect everything underneath one strategic plan, one messaging framework. And so I kind of went out on a quest to solve this problem for more companies, and that's kind of where we're at.
And it was interesting, when you and I connected for the first time last year, you were like 6 months into sort of going one step further into the sort of the franchise space with Groundcrew specifically working with home services businesses. I mean, how much of a shift was that from the work that you were doing before, like in the technology space, to now working with real people that you can see driving around in their vehicles doing services that everyone listening would be familiar with?
Yeah. You know what? It's funny. There's a lot of differences, but there's more similarities that you think. I think the most entertaining difference with working with technology companies and working with these home service business owners is they have their weekly syncs with me sitting in their field trucks, right? These are teams that aren't in offices. They're out in neighborhoods with their teams, making sure that the work is getting done, talking to local customers. And it's just funny, just the difference between having a weekly meeting in an office setting and calling guys that are in their trucks just trying to get more business. But the biggest similarity I think was that I noticed was that positioning and messaging is just as big of a challenge whether you're operating a technology company or you're operating a local home service company. On the home service side of things, I mentioned a minute ago, saturated markets and just a lot of competitiveness. And that definitely exists in the local home service market too. There's a lot of players in local cities and regions. And so they really have, maybe even more so than technology companies, they have to figure out how to differentiate because, people that are looking for something like a tree service or a lawn care service, they're using tools like Google. They might be using tools like ChatGPT maybe, or they're looking at Facebook asking for referrals from their friends. They're going to spend a very short amount of time trying to find which company is highest rated, which one has the best reviews, which has the best online presence, which one shows up in search results. And so after they do all that, I think having that message on the homepage or on the truck is incredibly important. So the
Uh-huh.
challenges are the same. On the technology side of things, they're dealing with messaging and positioning problems too. They're because I work with startups, they're often in saturated markets with players that are much bigger, much more mature, much bigger budgets from a marketing and go to market standpoint. So a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah. But, as were explaining that, I guess there's one of the benefits that, a home services franchise would have, for example, is, you mentioned their vehicles. Tech companies don't have vehicles driving around with their names on them typically. Whereas, when you're serving a local community and your truck is driving around every day with your branding all over it, clearly that is a big advantage that you have. And I'm guessing it's probably also one of the reasons that a lot of people who get into the home services industries, um, from whether with something that they didn't start necessarily when they were 19 years old. The reason that they maybe go for a franchise is because the brand is already recognized, the messaging is already taken care of. Do you see a big advantage for franchises in the home services space?
Yeah, definitely a big advantage. A lot of the franchisees that I'm working with are former technology people, right? They worked in the technology industry or the finance industry, and some of these owners are, in their late 30s or early 40s, and they're buying their first home service franchise for the very first time. So they didn't grow up in this industry. They don't have experience. I mean, we all commute every day to go to work. We see the home service vehicles on the road, but it's a whole new world for them, and a lot of the challenges of running a business are similar, but there's also big differences like things like vehicle wraps. If you're in a technology job, you've probably never thought about who do I go to wrap a vehicle? What are the options? And then, do I do a full wrap? Do I do a half wrap, a quarter wrap? What does the wrap say? What is the messaging that I should use? And so I think there's a lot of power behind being a part of a franchise that can provide you with the strategic direction, not just from a graphics standpoint, but from the message that you put on that vehicle. Because
Yeah, all that
it's
heavy
funny,
lifting's already been done. Yeah.
yeah, and it's funny, being relatively new to this industry, I learned that those vehicle wraps are one of the most effective lead generation tools that a local home service business can use. And I think a lot of us kind of just overlook it because we see them all the time on the road and it's kind of just noise. But people see those numbers and they call them. People pull in for gas at a gas station, they see a service truck parked there, and it's very effective. And so getting that
Right.
message right and doing it the right way is hugely important. And if you can have a franchise that can give you that direction, help you implement and activate the right way, I think it's night and day difference.
Yeah. And I guess if you think about of people who are maybe moving between cities or states, I guess that's another time when a franchise would have an advantage. Like, so if you're now living in a completely new city or a new state where you don't know any of the local businesses, if you recognize a brand that you've seen in wherever you lived before, chances are you would call them to see if they would be, come and do whatever it is that you need them to do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the old McDonald's strategy, right? You walk into any McDonald's or Starbucks and you're going to get the same or similar experience. And so I think they strive for that in all of their markets, the ones that I work with anyways. They meet and talk regularly with their regional leadership team at the franchisor level. They meet with other business owners of the franchise in other markets, and creating that consistency from a brand standpoint, but also just process standpoint, I think can make a big difference.
Right, right. Okay, so Rob, let's sort of bring it back because I know, one of the things that and one of the reasons that people bring you in to sort of strategically align what they're doing with, so that where the strategy and the execution of what they're trying to do, which is ultimately what drives the revenue. That's why they're bringing you in, is so you can create some alignment between the messaging that eventually, after multiple actions and choices of actions, it drives revenue. Where do you most often see misalignment slowing revenue down?
Yeah, I think it is really that gap that exists between strategy and activation. On the technology side of WG, nearly every leadership team that I've worked with has gone through some sort of messaging or positioning or branding exercise. And there's a lot of energy behind those consulting engagements. They're a lot of fun to go through to talk about big picture things like value propositions and differentiation and story. But what usually happens, or what's happened to the ones that I've talked to, is they get to the end of an engagement like that and they get all this material, all these strategic frameworks that they know they should be using. And then there's no one to come alongside them to help them activate those strategies meaningfully. And so what they do is, they open up their Google Drive and they click on the strategic framework and they look at it and they scroll through it and they think, yeah, gosh, we should really be using this. And then, nothing happens. And so I think that that's really challenging. And the same thing happens just in different ways on the ground crew side of things or with franchise home services. There's no shortage of strategy from the franchisors and from the owners themselves. They know what they should be doing. The problem is, how do you prioritize the things that you need to be doing in the next 30 days to fill the top of your pipeline so that the next 60 to 90 days you have jobs that you can drive to or that you can send your team to?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same problem that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, where the strategy is being developed at the top by the franchisors, and they do what they can to make sure that their franchisees are set up with the right tools, the right strategy. But at the end of the day, it really is the business owners at the ground level that has to do the execution work. They have to be the ones that are going to the local events. They have to be the ones that are finding the advertising opportunities or working with a local direct mail provider who can hang door material or drop things in mailboxes. And I think that's really where revenue is impacted, is on the execution side of things. You spend a lot of money building these strategies, at least on the technology side, and the franchisor spends a lot of money putting together these strategies.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a drop off that happens for one reason or another, and sometimes it's time too, right? In the home service industry, the owners that I'm working with, they don't necessarily have time to think all day about marketing because they are out in the field. They're managing their teams, they're managing equipment, they're managing customer calls and prospecting. And so sometimes they get to the end of their day and it's, 8, 9, 10 p.m. And then they have to think about what should we be doing from a, lead generation perspective, a go-to-market perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to drive the most revenue for us in the next 30 days. And sometimes there's just not enough time in the day to solve that.
Yeah. So I guess that brings me to something else that I know you're passionate about, which is when their messaging has to do more than just tell a story, right? And because whether it's a vehicle wrap or a door hang or whatever it is, wherever people are seeing their message, it has to create some sort of urgency. So
Right.
when did you realize that narrative had to create urgency, not just tell a story?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a problem that I think has existed my entire career working for these early stage high growth companies, is creating urgency. Like any team that I'm working with, if I ask them, what's the urgency to work with you? It's an extremely hard question to answer, but it's an extremely important question to answer because of how saturated and competitive the market is. We really have to get down to understanding the buyers, understanding the ideal customer profile. What are the pains that they're dealing with? What are the rewards that they're looking for? And what is the impact of doing nothing for their customer, right? And so drilling into that, I think, is important, and it shows up in the messaging activation. But
Mm-hmm.
it's been a constant theme, for the past 15 years, is how do we get people to move from research phase to conversion phase? And it's not an easy question to solve, but when you solve it, it really is the difference between slow growth and that hockey stick growth that everyone's looking for.
Yeah, which I guess comes back to ultimately whatever business you're in, and franchises have the same challenge that every other business has, which is market differentiation right now. And in the home services space, I guess so what you're saying is home services by definition or by default are in a noisy competitive space. It's really hard to find a blue ocean in home services. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. And I could give a specific example in the home service tree service industry. It's winter right now in Minnesota. There's a lot of snow. people aren't necessarily thinking about their trees. And so how can we drive urgency to get people to think about their trees? If you look out the window, all of your trees look dead anyways. And so it's hard for you to know what trees need attention. But in a week like this week, we've gotten a lot of snow suddenly in the last day. And so that's pressure that gets created. And so we want their customers to understand that, your trees are experiencing pressure that they don't experience all winter long. There could be problems that are coming up because of that. It's a good opportunity to have someone come out and at least look at how your trees are doing. Is the weather impacting the structural integrity of trees? Are they up against any buildings? And so there's things that we can do, I think, to drive urgency in periods when seasonality is affecting the number of people that are coming into the top of the pipeline.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. But then I guess so differentiation, I guess, is what you're saying is hard in a home services business, because it's, how do you, like, whether you're a tree service or a lawn service, or you name it, even maybe more sort of intricate plumbing services, or electrical or otherwise, it is really hard to differentiate, because essentially a plumber is doing the same as the next plumber, and the tree services person is probably doing the same thing, or are there ways that they can do something different?
Yeah, I think in local markets like that, reputation really is king. And so the clients that I work with, they spend a lot of time on that customer service piece. And it's funny because on the technology side, if I were to say, if I were to hear that customer service is a differentiator for them, it's a little bit hard to believe because that's almost table stakes with technology. You expect that if you're paying a subscription for a software product, that customer service has to be good, right? On the home services side of things, I think it's even more real and even more important because that's the difference between getting your next 5, 10 referrals or not. And so there's things like that can help with differentiation. I think also leaning into your approach, leaning into your philosophy, and leaning into your knowledge of your craft is really important too. And that can be important for differentiation too. Like the tree service company that I'm working with, those guys can talk about trees all day long, and they will talk about trees all day long, right? They are tree nerds in every sense. And I think that that's a big differentiator for them versus somebody that maybe purchases a tree service company, or they start a tree service company and they're really focused on everything else that you have to be focused on in your business. And maybe they neglect positioning themselves as thought leaders in the tree space. I think that's a big miss for companies like that, and a big opportunity for people that are in those highly specialized local home service industries.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess, ultimately what we're talking about here, as you sort of narrow this down, is positioning, right? So
Hmm.
at WG, how do you translate positioning into sort of go to market orchestration and ultimately
Yeah.
sales enablement? And this maybe is more relevant if you think about it from a franchisor perspective.
Hmm.
There are things that they can do from a go to market and sales enablement perspective to help their franchisees be successful, right? But how do you translate positioning into go to market orchestration?
Yeah, the way that I like to think about it is it's really an upside down triangle or a funnel, if you can picture that in your head. So we really start as broad as possible, building the foundation from a almost identity and positioning standpoint. So we have big conversations around things like, who is your customer? What is the journey that they're on right now? What are they looking for? What are the value propositions that make you unique in the market? What's the narrative behind why you started the business, but also what's the narrative that your customer needs to hear that will help them understand that you understand what they're dealing with and who they are. So we start very broad, and then we start to get a little bit more specific as we go down that funnel or the upside down triangle. So we start with that foundation, we go a little bit tighter, and we talk about characteristics of buyer personas, we talk about market dynamics, we talk about all of the things that we need to understand and align on in order to reach the right customers at the right moment in time. That's still kind of at the strategy level, right? So we start with a foundation, we get a little bit more specific on the strategy, and then we move into the tip of that upside down triangle. So we get into the tactical motion. And for me, how we translate positioning to activation in the market is it's all about focus and prioritization, right? Especially with franchises and home service, there's hundreds of ways to spend your marketing dollars, and there's only so much time, and you don't have an unlimited budget anyways, right? And so you really need to get tactical on what are the right go-to-market plays at this moment in time? Why do we believe these plays are right? And what can we talk about that will resonate most now? So I like to work at about a 90-day sprint for these businesses. It aligns really well, obviously, with quarterly revenue goals, and we can break that down even by a month by month perspective. But if you think about, a lawn care service, for example, they're experiencing similar challenges that a tree service company would experience right now, because at least in Minnesota, there's snow on the ground. So there's not a big need for a lawn service. And
Hmm.
so, but that being said, we're coming up on spring. And so even I'm starting to get, the sales calls from the lawn service companies trying to get me to sign up for programs because spring is coming. And so I think that's a perfect example of understanding seasonality, understanding who your customer is, and then picking a couple plays that you can weave your positioning into that are highly relevant and highly timely for the right groups of people. And then it's all about execution, right? And I think in general across technology or home service, people tend to give up on campaigns too early. They are really eager to see results, and if they don't see results in the first 10 days or one day even, then they kind of lose hope, and I think they give up before they can see the true value of what the campaign can do. So for me, it's that prioritization, the focus, and then being consistent and working a campaign through the entire cycle that we need to work through in order to see that impact over time.
Right. So, Rob, I mean, I'm pretty impressed. We're like 25 minutes into this recording, and mentioned we haven't mentioned AI yet.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
So, which of course is ultimately it's a big part of what everyone is trying to figure out. So, you know, completely related to what it is that you're talking about around messaging and activation, and actually translating the sort of the narrative and the strategy that you've created for these companies. um, AI is going to be I mean, I know that you're already using AI a lot as part of your process, and I'm guessing you're also starting to build that out for your clients. And how can they use AI to activate some of the things that they're doing? I'm guessing the obvious one, of course, is accelerating content creation. But as AI accelerates in like content creation, for example, why does clarity become even more important than it was before?
Yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this because I have a lot of opinions about AI. I think, we're obviously in a very exciting, scary time, I think, for some people with AI.
Hmm.
And, with the work that I do, even positioning and messaging, it's very easy to go use a tool like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini and tell it, some basics about your business. I run a lawn care service company in this city. We focus on these things. Generate for me positioning and go to market strategy, right? Tell me who my customer is, give me the personas, give me the value propositions I should use, give me the website copy, give me the ad copy. It's very tempting to do that. The problem with doing that, and I've written a lot about this, is it's the same problem that you have in other areas of marketing. It's garbage in, garbage out in terms of the data, right? So if every lawn service company, and I'm just focused on home service for now, but it's applicable to technology too. But if every lawn care service company is going to ChatGPT in a particular city and saying, give me a positioning strategy, give me a go to market framework, the tools are using the same data for, let's say, all five companies, and so you might get variations of the output, but in general it's going to sound and look very similar, and so it's not true differentiation.
Hmm.
What's missing is, and I think you can do that, right? I think you can and should use AI tools. I think you need to feed it data in order to make the output better. That's one point. But most companies right now, I think, are missing a step in this process where they take the output that they get and then they massage it, right? They refine it, they work with it, they put it back into the AI tools that they're using until they can get, and then there's the human layer on top of it, right? Until they can get the true differentiation and positioning that they need. I think AI is a great tool to help you plan from a go-to-market standpoint. It can help you almost as a research assistant, or almost as someone else on your team that can kind of pressure test your ideas, or give you ideas to think more about. But I think the problem that most teams have, whether it's technology or in home services, they're wanting the quick win, right? They want the magical shortcut that everybody wants when you think about marketing and sales. And I think it can do more damage than good if you don't keep that human layer baked in that can really think critically about what it's giving you and how you can use it.
Yeah, and I think, as you're saying that, I mean, in this case, the human layer is that sort of expertise that certain humans have in that particular field. So, and because what you hear across the board, what's missing, in other words, where you get garbage out of AI instead of good stuff, is because you're missing a certain amount of context, right? So the example
Right.
you gave, I think, is a really good one. And what's missing there is they haven't gone deep enough, and that depth is what creates the context, right?
Yeah. I think also a lot of the times you get more than what you need in those outputs, right? And so then you have the same problem that I talked about earlier in our conversation, where it's like you got the same problem, right? Now you have a strategy, you don't know what to do with it, and it can give you ideas on what you should do with it, but at the end of the day, someone has to be the one to decide.
To
This
make a
is where
decision.
we're prioritizing for the next 90 days. This is why we're prioritizing. We're using this data to inform and guide us in the strategy, but we have to focus because we can't do everything, right? And I think you get more than what you need with AI tools a lot of the time, unless you're really good about, again, the data that you're putting in, the prompting that you're doing to get the right output that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. Where else do you see, AI becoming, a real differentiator for businesses, big, whether it's a one unit franchisee or a large franchise, and and everything in between? Where do you see AI potentially having the biggest impact in 2026 with regards to just leadership, creativity, or anything else?
I think a couple areas come to mind. One is just efficiency in terms of how that strategy is being developed. I think without AI, the idea of compiling market data and doing customer interviews and doing market surveys and putting in all of your existing messaging and putting that all in kind of a bucket and filtering, sifting through it to understand what is the best nuggets that we can pull out of this bucket in order to inform positioning and marketing strategy. That it used to take a lot of time, right? That's a big lift in order to get to that point. Now I think if you're using the tools the right way, you can get to the point a lot quicker. You still have to sift through the data, you still have to be critical of what you get out, but I think you can use multiple sources of data a lot faster than you used to be able to use to inform business decisions. On the tactical side of things, where I think the biggest impact could be and is starting to be already, is I know that home service companies and franchises across a lot of different industries, beauty salons, are starting to leverage AI phone assistants to intake calls, right? And the technology has gotten good enough where you're not annoyed as a customer calling and talking to an AI voice assistant anymore. I think it's still not perfect, obviously,
Hmm.
but it's a lot better than it was a year or two ago. And so I know a couple franchisors that are implementing AI phone assistants or AI phone platforms that can intake inbound calls from people in markets and then help them schedule or help them follow up with a potential appointment. So I think that's a big opportunity.
Yeah. So where they essentially connect their knowledge base and create sort of an agent, like a customer agent that can actually handle 70% of the calls that they get. Yeah.
Yeah, because again, like it's the same problem that I mentioned a few minutes ago, where these owners are not sitting in an office waiting for the phone to ring, right? They're in the field, they're in their trucks, they're servicing equipment, they're making sure their teams have what they need, or they're talking with customers. And so they can sometimes pick up that phone, but oftentimes, they're just not available to pick it up. And so what we know about the customer side of things is you've got 5 tree service companies. In your Google search results, you're going to start at the top and start working your way through. And if they miss that call, they miss the revenue. And if they miss that revenue, they don't just miss the one tree, they miss every tree for an entire lifetime, at least for that family, because I think customer loyalty is really important for these businesses too. And so if you can do a good job, you will have a customer for the entire lifespan of their home ownership. So that's a lot of revenue that you're potentially leaving on the table because you just don't have time to pick up the call.
Yeah. You don't have time, or you don't have an AI that's able to do that for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which comes back to what you were saying earlier too, around the sort of, customer service is such a critical part of that business, because if you're delivering a good service to that particular customer, they're going to be calling you every year to do
Yes.
whatever that service is, and that is worth gold to any business, right?
Yeah. And also in that specific example for lawn care or home service, there's upselling and expansion that can happen too, right? So if you do a good job with one tree, then you call them again the next year for plant health care, or you call them the next year for a couple trees on your property, or maybe you have a commercial property or a rental home that you want to send them out to. And so there's a large amount of potential revenue sitting on the table. And if you can get that customer loyalty, it's, I think, really beneficial for the health of your business.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, Zappos was kind of the best example of this for a long time, where that their customer service was so good that, like, people would call them just to listen to someone help them with something random, to the point where, like, they had customers who were buying shoes from them call them saying, would you please start an airline, because I want to buy other stuff from you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which, and the other example I was thinking of, like, in the northern states, like where you and I are, where, like, a lot of seasonality, where, like, a lawn service or a tree service business, doesn't operate all that much in the winter, when everything's covered in snow or ice. A lot of those types of businesses, in Minnesota, for example, also offer snow removal services, in the winter, because that's, again, it keeps them busy. And if their customers love them for their tree service or their lawn service, they will absolutely want to use them for their snow removal, because why would they want to find another service to do the snow removal if they already know and trust and like their summer services
Yeah.
folks?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, as we wrap up here, like, what is one action leadership teams can take this quarter? Here we are, we're already staring into the back end of Q1. These weeks, months, and quarters go by so quickly. What is one action leadership teams can take this quarter to ensure positioning drives execution this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think at the tactical level, what I would recommend and what I would do if I were working with any company is to just do a full audit on anywhere that your messaging is showing up across physical and digital channels that you're using. So that means your website, your email campaigns, that means your physical collateral that you're taking to trade shows, it means your direct mail that you're sending to homes. It could mean third-party listings or advertisements in city newspapers or magazines, and just like put it all out in front of you, and take stock of what you're saying and look for inconsistencies. And the other thing that I would do is, you know, if you have all this content in front of you, if you can imagine, slapping another logo on top of it, does it sound like anyone else, or is the differentiation are the differentiation anchors that make your business unique still, can you still identify them as yours? And if you can't, then I think you've got some work to do. I think that's a great place to start because we live in a digital world and there's so much messaging out there. There's so many places that you have to have a presence on. I think it gets very overwhelming, and I don't think businesses take this step often enough where they're just taking stock of everything that they have out there. Usually what's happening is things are being updated on a case by case basis, right? They're not looking at the full picture, and it just muddies up positioning. It makes it harder for your customers to understand who you are and what your differentiation truly is. If they're reading five different versions of your brand story or five different versions of your, differentiation anchor, I think it makes it harder for them to understand who you really are and what makes you unique. So I would recommend starting there. The other thing that I would say is pick one channel, right, for the next 90 days that you want to test. If you're in our area, in the northern part of the country, we're hopefully exiting out of winter in the next couple months. Direct mail as a tactic is not a great tactic during winter months, but as we get closer to spring, it's a very effective tactic. And so if you can allocate budget, if you can think strategy, think about your offer, think about the message that you want to communicate to people about your service, um, in the next 90 days, I think focus on that, do the best job you can at executing at that channel, and then let everything else kind of sit on the back burner while you execute on that channel. Wait for the results and the impact to come in, and then think about what the next 90 days look like after that.
I think that's really good advice. And I guess I would probably add to what you were saying, if anyone listening there is saying, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea," but they don't feel confident that they're able to, like strategically assess all the content that they have to make sure that it's update. You know, they should probably call someone like you or someone who's a messaging and sort of strategic content expert who can, again, it's a very it's a to your point, it's such a valuable thing for them to do. Don't waste time not doing it because you don't feel confident doing it yourself. Get somebody who can do that for you really, really quickly so that it is done properly, because everything you do for the rest of the quarter or next quarter or the quarter thereafter is going to be based on getting that piece right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'd love to get those calls. I love going through those audits and coming up with actionable plans on how to make the messaging and positioning tighter. But circling back to our AI part of the conversation, if at the very least, you can plug that messaging into an AI tool and ask a tool like ChatGPT or Claude to find these inconsistencies, find the common themes, and maybe find the opportunities. It can do that for you. Again, it's part of efficiency, right? You can have someone, or you can have a tool do that. The problem that still exists is, what do you do with that information once you have it? And so that's when I think working with someone like me can help you make sense of the output that you get, and also how and when to act on it in a meaningful way that's going to drive the outcomes that you want for your business.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Rob, thank you so much.
Great.
Was great having you on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I look forward to more conversations and trying to figure out, how to help more franchises and franchisees be successful in this space.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
All
Rob.
right. Yep. Bye.
Bye bye.